Before we discuss the $12 million, I need to explain why my parents were telling my entire hometown I was locked in rehab. I slid the manila folder across the glass table. The lead investor looked down at the documents, then back at me. He did not blink. I did not either. I am 28 years old, and I have never touched a substance in my life. But if you ask anyone in Cheyenne, Wyoming, they will tell you a tragic story about a daughter who lost her way. Before I take you back to the morning I realized how far they had taken the lie, do me a favor. Drop a comment with your age and where you're listening from, and hit subscribe. Welcome to Cherry Vengeance. Stay with me on this one. 18 months before that London boardroom, I was standing outside a post office in a Wyoming wind, opening a forwarded envelope from my Aunt Linda. Inside was a sympathy card. Her handwritten note said, "We are all praying for your recovery, Nora. It takes strength to battle your demons. Get the help you need." I read it twice on the sidewalk. My parents, Richard and Susan Price, had spent 30 years building an image. My father managed a regional insurance branch. My mother ran the neighborhood association. Their lawn was perfect. Their names appeared in the country club newsletter. And then there was my brother David. David was 31, charming in the way people are when they expect someone else to absorb the cost of their failures. 2 years earlier, he opened a steakhouse downtown. He spent money on leather booths and imported light fixtures before he had a stable menu. 6 months later, he could not make payroll. That same year, my grandmother Helen died and left her life savings, $80,000, directly to me. The day the money landed, my parents sat me down at their dining room table. My father slid a wire transfer form across the wood and told me David needed a bridge loan. He called it family duty. David stared at his phone. I slid the paper back and said no. In the Price family, a daughter saying no to a son was not a boundary. It was treason. I packed my apartment the next morning and left without a forwarding address. My parents needed a story to explain my disappearance. They could not tell people their daughter walked away because they tried to confiscate her inheritance. So they built a better narrative. Nora had a breakdown. Nora was in long-term residential treatment. Please respect our privacy. They turned my absence into a weapon. I still might have stayed quiet if they had stopped there. But just as I was preparing to leave the country, I got an alert from my credit union. Someone had presented a medical proxy claiming I was incapacitated and requested an immediate freeze on my assets. My father was standing in a bank trying to take my $80,000. He had a forged power of attorney notarized by a golfing friend. The document claimed I was medically unfit to manage my finances because I was in acute rehabilitation. I did not panic. I opened my laptop. Wyoming makes it very easy to form a private LLC. I had already prepared the paperwork. 3 minutes later, Ironwood Holdings existed. I moved the entire $80,000 from my personal checking account into the new corporate account. My personal balance dropped to zero. A text came through from an unknown number. Where did the money go? I blocked it. Then I bought a biometric hardware security key at an airport electronics kiosk and attached it to my keychain. A small silver whistle. Without that key, no one was getting into my accounts, no matter how much of my childhood they thought they owned. I boarded a one-way flight to Europe with no physical address, no money in my personal name, and no intention of coming back until I was untouchable. Before takeoff, my encrypted app chimed. It was Kendra, David's wife. Kendra was a forensic accountant from Chicago. Sharp, elegant, and impossible for my mother to manipulate. Over the years, we had built a quiet alliance through raised eyebrows and strategic silence. Her message said my father had come back from the bank furious, and my mother was now telling everyone the rehab facility had required a massive upfront deposit that drained my accounts. Then came the second message. Susan had emailed the extended family asking for donations to keep me in treatment. Aunt Linda had already sent $5,000. That was the moment it stopped being a family conflict. My parents were now using my name to solicit money under false pretenses. They were committing fraud. And I was the only person positioned to dismantle it. I landed in Tallinn, Estonia, rented a bare studio apartment, and started building what would become Ironwood Logistics. My grandmother Helen had spent years quietly teaching me how money really worked. She used monopoly bills to explain liability shielding, shell companies, and the kind of father who sees a daughter's resources as communal property. In this family, she used to say, if you do not build a wall around your money, your father will build a cage around you. I built the wall. While I coded 18-hour days in Estonia, Kendra monitored the situation in the United States. Every Sunday, my parents hosted family dinners. My mother played the grieving matriarch. My father accepted sympathy. Relatives wrote checks for my fake treatment. The money went into his personal account, then into David's failing restaurant to cover payroll and vendor bills. Kendra built a spreadsheet. Red for fraudulent deposits. Blue for fake invoices. Green for transfers into David's business. Then one night she sent me a scan of a document she found on my father's desk. It was a pristine invoice from a luxury psychiatric clinic in the Swiss Alps. 30 days of inpatient treatment. $42,000. Patient, Nora Price. It looked professional, but the formatting gave him away. The font, the spacing, the structure. It matched the insurance denial templates my father used at work. He had manufactured a foreign medical bill to extract larger donations. By then, the stolen funds were approaching $30,000. Every instinct told me to expose them immediately. But I was weeks away from pitching my software to European investors, and public family scandal would have contaminated everything. So I waited. I filed my patents under Ironwood Holdings. I kept building. Then the threat changed. One night Kendra messaged me in a panic. A man in a gray suit was going door to door in Cheyenne asking neighbors exactly when I had left town. She sent a photo and a license plate. I traced the rental car to a corporate firm called Apex Intelligence Group. Their investigator was Elias Thorne, former SEC forensic auditor. My parents had not hired him. Meridian Ventures had. The same venture capital firm considering a $12 million Series A for Ironwood Logistics was running a background check. If Elias heard the local story, he would report that the founder of Ironwood was an unstable addict in Swiss Rehab, and the deal would disappear. So I contacted him first. I sent him his exact coordinates, the make of his rental car, and a secure video link. 4 minutes later he joined from the driver's seat. I showed him my passport. I showed him Tallinn outside my window. I showed him Ironwood's live back-end processing thousands of freight transactions in real time. Then I told him the truth. Not emotionally. Structurally. I explained the forged proxy, the fake rehab story, the donation scheme, the fraudulent invoices, the flow of money into David's restaurant. I told him he was looking at a localized family fraud ring, not an unstable founder. Then I offered him a better assignment. Stop interviewing neighbors about my mental health. Start gathering evidence. Over the next 72 hours, Elias coordinated quietly with Kendra. He collected physical proof. Copies of fake invoices. Affidavits from neighbors. Postal records showing my parents mailed donation requests across state lines. Kendra gave him the ledger. I merged everything into one clear, clinical dossier. When Meridian Ventures requested a final meeting in London, I brought that dossier with me. So back in that boardroom, before anyone could question my stability, I slid the folder across the table and said, before we discuss the $12 million, I need to explain why my parents are telling my entire hometown I'm in a locked rehab facility. I walked them through every piece of it. The forged medical proxy. The attempted theft of my inheritance. The shell company I used to secure the money. The biometric key on my keychain. The fake Swiss invoices. The donation fraud. The evidence chain proving my family had zero access to me, my company, or my assets. I told them a founder who cannot protect her own checking account cannot be trusted with institutional capital. I had identified the threat, isolated it, documented it, and neutralized it. Thomas, the lead partner, closed the folder, leaned back, and said he had seen CEOs panic over bad press. He had never seen a founder preemptively audit her own relatives to secure a funding round. Then he signed. By the end of the day, $12 million was being wired into Ironwood's corporate account. And while I was walking out of that London office, my father was already escalating again. He had shifted his attention to my empty house in Cheyenne. He had my social security number, old tax records, and the answers to every childhood security question. He used them to apply for a $150,000 equity line against my property. He got through the first layers. Then the portal asked for the physical hardware token. My silver key. He did not have it. The system locked, flagged the attempt as fraud, and sent the alert to my phone. I pulled over in London, called a Wyoming real estate litigator named Marcus Thorne, and within 20 minutes he had filed a notice of contested title with the county clerk. For $15, my house became radioactive to lenders. No bank would touch it. The next morning my father drove to a branch in person with his forged documents, and the loan officer told him the property was frozen. That was the first crack in his confidence. The second was public. A few days later, Forbes requested an interview. A journalist had discovered conflicting rumors about my absence from Wyoming. I said yes and invited her to Tallinn. I did not deny the rumor emotionally. I crushed it with reality. I walked her through the headquarters, the engineering floor, the shipping maps, the funding round, the corporate timeline. I let the existence of Ironwood destroy the fiction. Then I posed for the cover photo in a navy suit on the rooftop overlooking the Baltic Sea. At the same time, Kendra was finalizing her divorce papers and coordinating with Marcus for precise delivery. The Forbes piece went live on the same day as my parents' annual family reunion in Cheyenne. They had turned the living room into a shrine. Childhood photos on the mantle. A brass box for contributions to Nora's healing journey. My father was giving a solemn speech about addiction. My mother was accepting envelopes. Then 30 phones in the room vibrated at once. The Wyoming Economic Review had syndicated the Forbes story with a local headline, "Local Girl Builds Global Tech Empire. Nora Price Secures $12 million. My relatives looked down and saw my face on a rooftop in Estonia, not in a Swiss clinic. They saw the valuation. The corporate timeline. The investors. The dates. Then they looked up at my parents. The room changed instantly. Pity became math. Before my father could recover, there was a hard knock at the door. 2 process servers stepped inside and handed my parents 40 pages of lawsuits, defamation per se, attempted real estate fraud, and federal wire fraud. A second envelope went to David. Divorce papers. Kendra picked up her coat, walked past all of them, and left without saying a word. By Monday, the family was demanding restitution. My parents had no liquid cash. They had already pumped the stolen money into David's restaurant. So they liquidated everything. Furniture. Art. Retirement accounts. It still did not save the restaurant. Creditors closed in, the landlord moved, and the bank foreclosed. My extended family pooled the money they had recovered and bought the property themselves at auction. They tore David's name off the building. Then David called me. He apologized badly, called it a misunderstanding, and asked for a bridge loan. Same phrase my father had used when they first tried to take my inheritance. I reminded him that he had seen the evidence on Kendra's computer. He had known what they were doing and accepted the money anyway. I told him anyone who needs an audit to find a moral compass is a liability I cannot afford. Then I hung up and blocked him. My parents tried one last move. They offered a private settlement and an NDA if I would drop the fraud claims and seal the evidence. I rejected it immediately. The point was never peace in private. The point was a public paper trail. They ran out of money, failed to answer the lawsuits, and the court entered default judgment against them. Marcus secured the real prize, a permanent injunction prohibiting them from discussing my name, my business, or my supposed medical history with anyone. If they revived the rumor again, they could face jail. The lie was no longer social. It was legally dead. Soon after, Kendra arrived in Tallinn with one suitcase and a finalized divorce. I met her at the airport with an employment contract. Ironwood needed someone who could track capital to the decimal and enforce hard boundaries. She signed on as Chief Compliance Officer. As for David, he eventually got a job as a mid-level logistics coordinator in a freight center outside Denver. On his first day, they told him the company had just licensed a new predictive routing platform and instructed him to log in. He typed his password, hit enter, and watched the Ironwood logo appear on his screen. He needed the paycheck. So every day, he worked inside the system I built. My parents ended up in a small rental on the edge of Cheyenne. Their country club membership gone. Their relatives gone. Their reputation permanently archived in public court records. When former neighbors see them at the grocery store now, they study labels instead of making eye contact. And I do not track any of it. Late one October afternoon in Tallinn, I stood on the glass balcony of Ironwood headquarters with Kendra, holding a cup of dark coffee and looking out over the Baltic Harbor. The company was growing. The numbers were strong. The perimeter was secure. We did not talk about Wyoming. That is the thing people misunderstand about surviving a family like mine. You do not need a dramatic apology. You do not need closure from people who only know how to consume. You need evidence. You need boundaries. You need structure they cannot breach. I set the coffee down, went back inside, opened my laptop, and started writing the next sequence of code. I was no longer defending a stolen inheritance. I was building something they would never touch again. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Cherry Vengeance. We tell the stories that expose what really happens behind perfect front doors. And if you are sitting in a house that feels more like a stage than a home, ask yourself one honest question. Are they building you a foundation? Or a cage?